I am in Shenandoah National Park here in Virginia for my first visit in 2 years, and today's focus is to see as many waterfalls in the park as possible. Let's go ahead and get started. Shenandoah National Park is a 79,579 acre park which protects a large swath of Appalachian mountain wilderness in the U.S. state of Virginia. Across 2 separate visits this trip to the Mid-Atlantic, I'll be highlighting the best of what this beautiful area has to offer, first concentrating on its top waterfalls, and then 2 videos from now showcasing its signature mountain hikes and overlooks. While the latter is most certainly what Shenandoah is most well known for, I chose to focus on waterfalls first as this region had only recently been hit by Hurricane Helene, which sadly obliterated parts of states further south, but up here brought just enough rain to really fill up the streams, creeks, and rivers. However, who's to say that the flow volume of these waterfalls would remain so high? See, that's why it was imperative for me to waste no time and hit them as soon as possible. I was also eager to see these for 2 other reasons. A, because I'm a big waterfall guy, it's personally one of my favorite natural features ever, but also B, the last time that I came to Shenandoah in 2022, we only had the opportunity to see one of the park's many falls, and at the time, its flow rate was rather disappointing. More on that later, but for now, I'd be starting off with a first-time visit for me, South River Falls. So supposedly there's 2 different options with the South River Falls trail. This is us right now. We're gonna come up here. You can either stop here at this overlook of the waterfall, or you can continue for about another mile to make it to the base, which is what I'm going to do. Since it's impossible to fully grasp the difficulty of hikes through the screen, I'd like to make it clear that the reason I needed to dedicate a full day to chasing waterfalls in Shenandoah is because all of these trails are decently or very strenuous. South River Falls in particular, I clocked in at nearly 4.5 miles round trip with 1,200 feet of elevation gain. What's different about the waterfall hikes you'll see today is all of that elevation actually takes place on the way back since you begin at the summit of these mountains. The majority of Shenandoah's trailheads are located right off of Skyline Drive, an iconic and phenomenally well-designed 105-mile road that runs the entire length of the national park. I'll be talking a lot more about it in my video about the park's mountain hikes and overlooks because that's really why it exists in the first place, to provide scenic views of mountains. Waterfalls are more so of an afterthought in Shenandoah, often because they aren't flowing as well and because, like I said, they do require a fair bit of effort to reach. It was fairly obvious I'd hit the jackpot with the timing of this visit though, once I saw how full the creeks and rivers were alongside the trail. And I have to say this added a lot to this specific hike as they were rather prominent the whole way through. The views don't change much throughout the hike, which is something I've noticed is pretty common in the eastern United States, but it could be a lot worse as the atmosphere was spectacular. On top of that were quite a few unique features that added to my enjoyment, such as some crossings, nothing too difficult but just enough to spice things up, as well as a quick pass through the 2,200-mile Appalachian Scenic Trail. Like with many different hiking trails in the park, you also have the Appalachian Trail cutting right on through Shenandoah National Park, going all the way from Georgia to Maine. That is so awesome. Eventually, I made it to the South River Falls overlook, which I found to be pretty disappointing due to all the trees blocking the waterfall. But it was still a decent overall view with a nice mountainside, and it revealed the size of the falls, which gave me a bit of extra motivation to hike down to the base. Though the last bit is relatively steep, I urge you to continue to the bottom for those who have this on their list, because frankly getting to just the overlook would not be worth the effort thus far. The lower view, on the other hand, is an entirely different story. We made it to South River Falls. I'm the only one at the base, and this waterfall is so cool. It starts off as one at the top, and then it splits off and goes down into this massive pool below. How awesome is that? South River Falls stands 83 feet tall and is the 3rd highest waterfall in the park, though of all the falls I visit in this video, it looks quite a lot larger standing next to it than it does on video. I was actually pretty blown away with how unique its shape was, and yes, the sheer power coming off the falls. And it's just got a spectacular location, basically in this little canyon with trees absolutely everywhere and this aforementioned pool at the bottom. An overall very strong start to the day, and I was amped to see more waterfalls afterwards. From the trailhead, a pleasant 20-minute drive took me to the next hike I'd be trying out, Dark Hollow Falls. Next up on our list is Dark Hollow Falls, by far the most popular waterfall in the park. This one I actually have seen before. However, the hike obviously was not the same because there's actually trees on the leaves this time. And also the waterfall was flowing just okay. I think this time it'll be a lot more impressive, so I can't wait to check it out again. The Dark Hollow Falls trail is quite approachable relative to all the others at just 1.6 miles round trip with 583 feet of elevation gain. This means the parking lot fills up quite fast, though I was lucky to be visiting in an off-peak period where I didn't have to worry much about crowds. If you suspect the park will be busy during your visit, I'd suggest heading here first, as you likely won't need to worry about parking at any of the other spots I recommend today. Like the South River Falls Trail, this hike is well designed, with water surrounding you the majority of the time. You've got a number of cascades and some picturesque steps to traverse before making it to the top of Dark Hollow Falls.
We have made it to the top of the waterfall. Once again, it's kind of blocked by trees. You can go around the fence, which I just did, to get a better view. But keep on going, the lower falls are only 1,000 feet from this point. Holy crap, this looks nothing like it did 2 years ago. I'm blown away. There's so much flow.
With good flow, Dark Hollow Falls deserves its popularity, with an incredibly scenic 70-foot decline with a series of steps and tiers. Unlike the last waterfall, there's also a lot of room to walk around and appreciate different angles, making it a real treat to film and take pictures of this one. And with the little bit of color that had hit the trees, combined with the leaves falling into the waterfall anytime there was a gust of wind, this was an all-around breathtaking sight. I'll also suggest that you continue downstream a little past the main falls, as well as the Dark Hollow Trail connects with several of the longer hikes in the park, and those who do so will be rewarded with another few sizable cascades. This was something I missed when I visited back in 2022, so I was glad to discover it this time around. I walked back up to the base of Dark Hollow Falls and enjoyed it for a little while longer, before wrapping things up and heading back to the parking lot. Now, before we continue to our next destination, I figure why not throw in a bit of a ranking from this point onwards, as that might help you decide which waterfalls to prioritize. While Dark Hollow Falls was drastically more impressive than I remembered, I think I'll still give the edge to South River Falls for having a more defined shape and location. We'll see how the rest stacks up to these two, but I'll say we're on a roll with how stunningly gorgeous these have been. Next up, the trailhead for Rose River Falls is located just 5 minutes up the road, and I was surprised by how many people were parked here. I later found out that there's a pretty extensive network of trails branching out from this lot, so there were probably only a small fraction heading to this waterfall, but it's worth keeping in mind for those planning in advance.
Next on our list is Rose River Falls. This is a giant loop, but we're just going to be doing it out and back. You go left for the falls. You can also continue this way along the Fire Road if you want to get to Dark Hollow Falls another way, which we already did.
The Rose River Falls trail requires about 2.5 miles of hiking round trip with 656 feet of elevation gain, which interestingly is more than Dark Hollow Falls, but because it's spread out through a trail that was a fair bit longer, this felt like the easiest hike of the day to me. Unfortunately, it was also my least favorite by quite a lot. Not that it was bad or anything, but it didn't seem like there was much going on for almost the entirety of the hike. You were basically just in the trees and that was it. However, towards the very end, once it got good, it got really good, with the trail meeting with Rose River and it being elevated way above. This resulted in some nice scenic views for that entire stretch until you reach the top of the waterfall. It doesn't take too long to figure out that this was easily going to be the smallest of all the waterfalls I'd visit, but there were still a number of elements that really made up for that. 1, the pools of water were incredibly clear with a vibrant tint of greenish yellow, and 2, there were so many possible angles you could enjoy this waterfall from. My favorites were getting to stand right beside the main tier, and also by a long shot this straightaway view where it looks like you're standing directly in the middle of the river. At 67 feet tall, Rose River Falls may not be too impressive in size, but it more than makes up for it, with it being one of the most quaint and underrated spots in the park. Still, I'll have to give it the rear on my list so far, as it doesn't quite hold a candle to Dark Hollow or South River Falls. Last, but certainly not least, I made the 15-minute drive further up Skyline Drive for the Whiteoak Canyon Trail, featuring a long list of waterfalls that far exceeded expectations. It was also by far the most difficult hike I'd be doing in this video, and one of the most strenuous I've ever done in the eastern United States.
Last hike of the day, and this one's definitely going to be the hardest. It's over 5 miles round trip. There's supposed to be several waterfalls along this route. The main one that I am hiking to is Lower Whiteoak Falls. There's also an Upper Whiteoak Falls that looks pretty cool, but you can't get to the base of that one. And on top of that, I think on this trail we should be getting some pretty cool mountain views for a change, so I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, let's go ahead and get things started.
What you just heard me say in that clip was not entirely true. I'd go on to learn that the 5 miles only factors in the upper falls. Continuing to the lower falls and seeing all of the tiers in between, which is an absolute must-do by the way, necessitates more than 7.5 miles round trip with well over 2,000 feet of elevation gain. For a while though, I felt like I was on the wrong trail or something because it had actually been a lot flatter than all the other hikes I had done. Similar to the Rose River Trail, it was also rather uninteresting with nothing more than foliage as you trek the first couple of miles. But things really start to look up once you reach this picturesque bridge over Robinson River, actually the third one of the hike, but the other two are quite a bit smaller, so I didn't bother to mention them. You get some pretty good views of some of the smaller cascades, and then in no time reach your first main point of interest, the Upper Whiteoak Falls overlook. I can't begin to tell you guys how shocked I was by this. Maybe it was because I'd been in trees for so long, but everything from the height of the waterfall to its location in Whiteoak Canyon and these interesting looking rock formations which you view it from were amazing. And looking back at the footage, I truly don't believe it's even close to representative of how it felt to be up there. I was shocked to learn that the upper falls were just 86 feet tall, which isn't small by any means, but it just seemed to be a hell of a lot bigger in reality. This could have been because of its flow rate, which seemed like it was the best of all the waterfalls I'd seen so far, or again, its location. Whatever the case, this became my single favorite viewpoint in the entire national park up to that point, which includes all that I experienced during my visit 2 years ago. And the reason that surprised me was because there wasn't much of an emphasis on mountains at all. That'll come later on in this hike, and believe me, things only get better from here. But first, a caveat. Remember when I said this hike felt a lot easier and was a lot more uninteresting than expected? Well, that was before I reached this sign that reads, "Attention, do not exceed your hiking ability. No shuttle transportation service." I remember being really thrown off by this as I hadn't seen a sign exactly like this in a national park before, but now I get why it was there. You begin rapidly decreasing in elevation with stairs on stairs on stairs and constant switchbacks along the river. But I still remain captivated due to the spectacular views and plethora of waterfalls that split the upper and lower tiers. This includes a middle falls that I didn't even know existed, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that it might have been my favorite waterfall of the entire day.
What the heck? I had no idea there was a middle falls to this as well. And this is enormous. It really reminds me of a waterfall you'd see in North Carolina because it flows off of this super smooth rock face. That is amazing.
With this, I think what really made it was that it was such a surprise. I always do my research before visiting these parks and generally know what to expect in terms of the hike and what you can expect to see along the way. But I kid you not, I had never seen a single photo or video of this middle tier, which is why I was so shocked it not only existed, but was so prominent too. I was the only one there, and in general, once I'd gotten past the Upper Falls overlook, I ran into very few people. With how the flow rate had been today, I was shocked this hike wasn't more popular at the time of my visit, especially because I'd already established at this point that it was the best of the day thus far. But just wait, there's still lots more. The trail continues to hug the river, and shortly after the last waterfall, you're greeted by a cascade that was similarly tall. Once again, I'm unsure it looks too grand on camera, but know that it was large standing above it in person. You also start getting your first mountain views from within Whiteoak Canyon, which was a welcome sight to give the hike some variety. The scenery here wasn't overly outstanding, but just the fact that it was integrated into the trail to switch things up a bit added a lot in my opinion. During this final stretch, you have some more steep downhill to get through, but it all pays off once you reach Lower Whiteoak Falls, my turnaround point for this hike, and the final waterfall of the day. I couldn't find a metric for height with this one, or the last couple, but once more, this was quite big and also fascinating due to it flowing off of a smooth rock face and splitting off into two streams. In a way, it felt like a distant cousin of South River Falls, which was appropriate given that the last waterfall I'd be seeing in the park reminded me of the first one I'd seen that day. Another beautiful scene with its location in the canyon and a sizable pool at the bottom, making it a worthy waterfall to end on in Shenandoah. I enjoyed a meal at the base and took in the views one last time before beginning my climb back up to the parking lot. This was a slog if I've ever seen one, so long and so challenging, but as you'll hear in my final review, so incredibly worth it too. But before I wrap things up, how about a ranking? This is quite difficult as the three main waterfalls along this route were all spectacular, but if I have to order them alongside the others, I'd place the middle falls solidly at number 1. Then I'll put the upper falls at number 4, marginally behind South River and Dark Hollow Falls. While I think this was more impressive as a standalone waterfall, I wish there was more than one view you could get of it and that you could appreciate it from the base. Finally, the lower falls can take number 5, which almost seems kind of low, but with all of its competition, I don't think you can really blame me. With all said and done, here's my list of all the waterfalls I saw in Shenandoah National Park. What an incredible lineup.
So I'm nearing the end of the Whiteoak Canyon Trail, and there's a lot to say. This was so hard. Like I'm wheezing right now. but to say that was worth it would be a massive understatement. That was one of the best waterfall hikes I think I've ever been on. Literally, I was surprised so many times. The second I got to the upper falls, the rest of the trail was just absolutely outstanding. So that is such a good note to end the video on. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Just one more note before we do so. These were all the waterfalls I could fit in a 24-hour span in Shenandoah National Park, but there's still several more that actually look really nice. One of those I wanted to quickly mention is Overall Run Falls, which is surprisingly the tallest waterfall in the park, but it does require a very long hike to get there, and you're just getting one viewpoint out of it, so to me that wasn't really worth it. But if I did come back to Shenandoah in the future, I would consider doing that one, so just keep that in mind if you're coming here. Otherwise, I had an absolutely spectacular day. As of right now, this is definitely my favorite hike I've ever done in this national park. But we'll see if that holds true in a couple of days, because we are going to be back here doing a lot more fun stuff. So I'll see you then. Peace out.